Hi, it's Kathy, Friendly Neighborhood Dietitian, and today I'm going to present to you cholesterol and blood pressure essentials. And check out our other videos on YouTube, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks.
And before we get started, we should just give credit where credit is due. And this presentation was adapted from Alberta Health Services presentation with the same name. So thank you to them for that.
What is the Highland Primary Care Network? The Highland Primary Care Network is a group of healthcare professionals whose aim is to support the doctors from Airdrie out to Didsbury. So if you doctor from Airdrie out to Didsbury, then your doctor has a nurse and social worker attached. And all throughout this pandemic, you have access to your nurse and your social worker by phone visit, and all you need to do is contact your medical home or doctor's office. We do have a number of other healthcare professionals associated with the Highland Primary Care Network. So our exercise specialist or kinesiologist, myself, the dietitian, and our pharmacist, as well as having a number of specialty clinics that normally run out of the Highland Primary Care Network. This class is one of many in the Health Improvement Program, and the Health Improvement Program is designed to help you uncover the healthiest version of yourself. And it is a series of classes, and we're working really hard to get them all available virtually and out to you as soon as possible. So today we'll talk about, quickly we'll talk about the benefits of a heart healthy diet, and we'll talk about what those cholesterol numbers mean. And if you happen to have yours, then by all means you can compare them to the targets that we'll be talking about. And it's a great idea to keep track of these over time because the trends can tell us a lot, and I'll speak more to that when we get there. And then we'll talk a little bit about heart healthy diets. So the 4 F's, and I'll explain those. And we'll talk about low sodium, the Mediterranean, and the DASH diets. We'll speak quickly about eating away from home and some label reading, and then go into some other lifestyle factors which can affect the heart, things like stress and smoking and activity. And then we'll finish off with a little bit on blood pressure, and essentially the diet recommendations for high blood pressure or hypertension are the same as they are for cholesterol. We just spend a bit more focus on the sodium. So while that's important for cholesterol as well and heart health, we especially focus on it when hypertension or high blood pressure is the concern. So I always think if you're attending class, and I would say most definitely if you're watching this online, you already have some indication at what the benefits of a heart healthy lifestyle might be. So we'll keep this short, but we do know that 8 out of 10 incidents of premature heart disease and stroke are entirely preventable with good lifestyle choices. So that we know that when you make investments into your healthy behaviors, that it really does reduce our risk. So those healthy behaviors being, of course, activity, healthy eating, absence of smoking, a moderate or absence of drinking, very definitely will lower our risk for heart disease. And with any disease or things that happen to us, there are factors that we cannot control. And of course, we can't control things like our family history, our age, or gender, or race, any pre-existing conditions we might have, such as diabetes, liver disease, or thyroid disease, although we can make efforts to also make our best choices within those. And then metabolic syndrome, which is a cluster of different conditions that occur together. So some things we can control though, and this is what we're going to focus on this presentation. Obviously, it makes no sense to focus on the things that we cannot control. So things that we can are basically, you know, what we do for movement and what we put into our mouth. Things like smoking. We'll talk really briefly on stress. I don't talk too much about sleep, but it is important. It's a foundation of our health. And it does affect all the other decisions we make. It definitely affects our dietary habits. And then, like I said, our movement, so activity and alcohol. So that's what we'll talk about in this presentation. So who should get checked? So these are the Canadian guidelines, but basically if you were to ask the doctors or the nurses in community who should get checked, pretty much everybody falls into those categories. Regularly we should have our cholesterol levels checked. It's nice to sort of track them over time as well. I did mention I was going to talk really briefly about stress. I just think very often it's left out of a lot of our conversations about health, and we add it in as an afterthought. But it's really important just to take a look at our own stress levels. So what happens in the body when we are under stress? Just keep in mind that the part of the brain that's activated when we're under stress is very primitive. It's the first part of the brain we ever had. So while our bodies and brains are amazing, the way we respond to the stress is kind of all in one bucket. So it's the amygdala, little acorn-shaped part of the brain that is lit up when we're under stress. And what it wants to do is basically help you fight or get you away from whatever is bothering you. So that fight or flight that people talk about. So a couple of simple things that happen. There's lots more, but to simplify it, think water in a garden hose, and those are your blood vessels. And what your brain wants to do is to get a lot of fuel to the big muscles so that you can fight or you can get out of the bad situation you're in. So what it does is it floods the body with things like cholesterol and blood sugar. Think of that blood vessels being like a garden hose, and it wants to get that out quickly. So squeezes the garden hose. So of course the pressure goes up inside the hose, or if it's your arteries, then it's your blood pressure. So if this happens once in a while and we're really good about managing our stress levels and it comes back down right away, then there's really little effect on the body. But if we don't take that opportunity to come back down to our baseline or we are compounding multiple stresses one on top of the other, then we can see some of these impacts to our health. And the other little note at the bottom there, just that bodies under stress tends to store calories. That is a typical response of the body. So the body doesn't know, once it's been under stress, the body thinks it wants to protect you in case there's more coming. So it wants to have some stores ready on board. So it tends to hang on to calories. So sometimes that can have a connection to people if they're having some difficulty or noticing they're doing the same behaviors, but their number on the scale, for example, is going up. So just something to consider, what your stress level is like. We do have a whole class just on stressing better, stressing well, it's called. So feel free to take that one in if you think that might be something that is affecting you. So cholesterol, like everything in the body, cholesterol of course has a really bad rap, but it does have its useful functions within the body. So it's a waxy substance in the blood. There's two main types, which we'll talk a little bit more about right away here. But it does have some important functions. It's part of your cell membranes, part of your nerve tissue, part of certain hormones. So just like everything else in the body, though, sometimes it gets out of balance. So really, it's about keeping balance of everything. And here's a picture of your arteries, and I often think a picture is worth 1,000 words. So what you're seeing in this picture is on the top is a normal, healthy artery. What you see at the bottom here is some fatty deposits or plaque building up in the artery, and you can see it's causing some trouble there. There's less room for the blood to get through. So this is essentially, if it builds up enough, this is what's causing our heart disease and can even cause a heart attack, or if it's in the brain, a stroke. I wanted to explain a little bit about what the numbers mean on your blood work. So you usually see a couple of different tests that they might do, so that you might have LDL, HDL, total cholesterol, and usually triglycerides as well. And sometimes there's a few other numbers there, but we'll focus on the first couple that I mentioned. So low density lipoprotein, you don't have to remember that, but if you can remember LDL, and if you can remember L for lousy, and we want to keep it low. So this is our bad cholesterol. Of course, a certain level is normal and healthy, but we really do want to keep it low. The target we're looking at for here is 3.37 with no risk factors, and less than 2 if you are at high risk. So if you have another comorbidity or another disease condition, your doctor may always have slightly different targets, and that's because they do something that's very personalized based on your own set of risk factors. So the numbers that I'm throwing out here are just population-based recommendations. So definitely go with the numbers that your doctor provides to you, but it's just to give you an idea of what those numbers should be looking like, or what we're looking for when we look at those tests. So, and the next one is high density lipoprotein. Again, you don't have to remember that. If you remember HDL, age, think healthy. We want to keep this one high. The HDL, I think of it like a car, and it kind of drives the rest of the fat out of the body. So yeah, it sweeps some LDL back to the liver, and it can be removed. It can be increased with more exercise, with omega-3 intake, and with fiber. So there's actually some things that we can add into our diet to help us with our cholesterol, which is kind of nice. We do definitely see this number come down in people who do smoke. So if there's any decreases, that can help for sure. So I usually, just to keep it really simple, I like to think of a target of more than 1. So we want to get that number up above 1. Triglycerides are a slightly different molecule. So they're 3 fatty acids on a glycerol backbone. I think of them, they're very much a storage molecule. And of course, we all need a little bit of storage. But we do tend to get a lot of triglycerides if we have an excess at any one time. So with our current lifestyle, it's not atypical for someone to skip breakfast or have a very small lunch and then have a really good size, decent meal at supper. Maybe they might even admit it's maybe a little too much all at one time. And that's sometimes where we can see triglyceride numbers slide up. So keep in mind, with all these things that I'm saying, there are people who can do all the right things, and sometimes these numbers are just out of whack. And in those cases, when people are doing everything they can with what they can control, sometimes they do need medications, and that's something to consider with your doctor. But it's good to try some diet and lifestyle modifications if you haven't done that as a first line. So yeah, when you think about triglycerides, think about storage, think about excess at any one time. So if you have a really big sweet tooth and you're sort of heavy on the sweets, or if you are drinking alcohol and a lot at any given time in the day, that can really increase our triglycerides. So again, our keep it simple kind of target is under 1.7 for triglycerides. Tips to reduce triglycerides. So like we talked about, just regular meals at regular times. Sometimes people have been able to improve their triglycerides, not by changing what they eat, but just by changing the timing. So by having a breakfast and a lunch, reducing their portion at supper, have been able to bring their triglycerides in check. So something to consider. Watch excess at any one time, so especially high sugar foods, so things like pop. I've definitely seen people do a reduction in pop and see the triglycerides come down. So we're talking about people with really high pop consumption who have been able to trim it down. So yeah, thinking about sugar and alcohol at any one time, that might contribute to high triglycerides. And then something we can add in is that those fattier fishes. And we'll talk about that coming up for sure. And as promised, we'd talk about heart healthy eating today. So we're going to go into these in a little bit more detail. So I say the 4 F's, which stands for fats, fruits and vegetables, fiber, and fluids. And then also going to touch on low sodium, of course. What is a healthy plate? So this is just my favorite way of trying to get people to change their health behaviors. Instead of knowing what the quote unquote proper portion is just thinking about, can I cut my plate in half? Could I fill that up with fruits and veggies? And then a quarter of it be the meat that I'm having, a quarter of it can be the grain product or the starch, and then half the plate with fruits and vegetables like I talked about. If you're nowhere near that, if there's a tablespoon or two of veggie on your plate and a big meat serving, perhaps we start by just saying a just noticeable difference, 2 bites less of that steak, 2 bites more of the veggies. What we do know about health behavior change in people is if they try to take on too much all at once, we can't keep it up. We can do anything for a short time because we are amazing. But what we want to think about is small changes that we can maintain in the long run. And when those small changes become very easy, then we can look at the next thing. It's more of a marathon than a sprint race with health change behaviors for sure. So I really do like this method rather than thinking about weighing or measuring or lots of controlling. For me, there's a lot less rules around it. So whatever you have, if you have half of your plate full of fruit and maybe half your plate full of veggies and maybe some fruit, whatever you have on the other side is going to be a lot better balanced. So it's just a much nicer way to set up our good relationships with food. Yeah. Yeah, did you know that our livers make most of the cholesterol in our bodies? And our livers do that from saturated fat and in our more modern lifestyle, trans fat. And we'll talk about those coming up right here. And usually when it comes to food, I like people to have really neutral language about, not saying things like these are good for me and these are bad for me. Unfortunately, I do the exact opposite when it comes to fats, and I talk about them as being the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the good guys, those are your unsaturated fats. So you don't have to remember that they're poly or monounsaturated, but we'll talk about what the sources of unsaturated fats are. And then I sort of alluded to the bad guys, the saturated fat, because our livers will take the saturated fat and turn it into cholesterol. And the same with the trans fats, which I sometimes refer to as the ugly fat. Just to back up a little bit, we'll talk about fat in general. Typically, when I hear fat, it usually brings foods of animal origin to mind. So you might think of the white trimming on your pork chop or your steak, or what people drain off their hamburger or their bacon. But it is also found in like the picture here, things like nuts and seeds and avocados. So it actually is found quite throughout the food supply in a lot of different types of foods. The unique thing about fat is it does provide a lot of energy. So bite per bite, you're getting more energy or more calories. That's kind of unique to fat, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. We need some fat. It's crucial for protecting our organs. There's lots of good that comes, but it's just when we have too much, it can, and when it's out of balance, of course, that can increase our risk of heart disease. We can get higher cholesterol and triglycerides. So I'm going to speak to the bad fats or the saturated fats first. And typically where you'll find these, I think of foods of animal origin with two exceptions, which I'll explain in a minute. I think that white marbling on your steak or pork chop, I think of what you drain off your ground beef or your bacon. If you have deep fried foods like fried chicken or fried French fries, butter is definitely a saturated fat. Saturated fats tend to be solid at room temperature, so that's a way to kind of tell as well. Whole fat milks, whole fat dairy also would have a bit more of the saturated fat. So the two exceptions is palm and coconut oil, and the manufacturers do use that quite a bit, so it's worth taking a look at the label. So the reason saturated fat is a problem is because our bodies take that saturated fat and turn it into cholesterol in our blood. And the other bad guy, the ugly trans fats, unfortunately increases our bad cholesterol and decreases our good cholesterol, so it's a bit of a double whammy there. Originally, when they found out how bad butter was for our arteries, they tried to make something like canola oil or olive oil into a spreadable product. And they did that through a process called hydrogenation. And the unfortunate consequence was that it created a chemical structure in the fat that our bodies just have never really seen before. And it's a man-made fat. So our body doesn't really know what to do with it. And that's why we have this increase in the bad cholesterol and decreasing our good cholesterol. So I typically think of where you would find trans fats is in hard margarines and shortenings, and some, anything commercially baked or prepared typically will have some trans fats. Thankfully, Canada has some legislation in that where the marketplace will have to get its trans fats down to 0. I believe it's within the next 3 years, so you will see that happening at the purchase points or grocery stores.
The tips to avoid trans fats are fairly straightforward. Where we find them the most are in hydrogenated margarines. So really those hard margarines, like imperial type margarines, hard square margarines. When you buy store-bought goods, they very likely will have high levels of trans fats. We will talk about labeling a bit more, but we're trying to find as close to 0 as possible on our food labels.
The good news, the good guys. There are lots of good fats out there that we want to get a little bit of. So things like olive oil, canola oil, you see the peanut oil here, avocados, and then nuts and seeds. So there's a few examples there for you. Of course, trying to get more of those omega-3 specifically. Omega-3 is an unsaturated fat, so those fatty fish for heart health. So the salmon, the herring, sardines, all fish is good for our heart health though, but the fattier the fish gives us more of those good fats. So I hear a lot of people saying they don't like fish. And I always laugh at this slide because I think if you don't like fish, what are the chances you'll like kelp and seaweed? But your other options are things like fortified foods. So they do have eggs and margarine that are fortified with the omega-3s in them. And then the plant sources of omega-3s, we can get this through ground flax and flax oil, walnut and walnut oil, or our chia seeds or canola oil have a little bit of omega-3. As I mentioned off the top, I was just going to give you caution about the omega-6. So it is also an unsaturated fat. So sometimes we may think, oh, that's good for us. It's an unsaturated fat. And in some respects, you'd be right. So if we do keep our omega-6s so that we have 2 omega-6 to 1 omega-3, then it's very healthy. But what happens if that omega-6 ratio gets a little higher, sneaks a little higher? They use different pathways, and the pathways they use can be inflammatory to us. So we just want to be careful because we use omega-6 a lot in the marketplace. Anything that's in a package or bag or box or salad dressing is a big one. We've found out, we don't want to have so much saturated fat. We don't want to have so much trans fat. Omega-3s aren't shelf-stable, so often the go-to is omega-6s. So just be really careful about that. The average Canadian has 13 omega-6 to omega-1. So, omega-3, pardon me, to 1 omega-3. So we just want to be careful about keeping that ratio up to the 2 to 1. So we do find it in some of the foods that are listed here, but I find it's not so much a concern in something like sunflower oil or the pecans as it is more of those prepared meals. Probably the biggest source of omega-6s in our diet is salad dressing. And definitely if you're taking an omega-3 6-9, there's no need for the 6-9, just take the omega-3. Oh, and I get this question all the time in class. What's the deal with eggs? Should we have them? Should we not have them? So eggs have dietary cholesterol. So people think, well, eggs have cholesterol and I don't want more cholesterol in my body, so I shouldn't have eggs. But the fact of it is that dietary cholesterol we take in from food, our body takes that and turns it into other things. So dietary cholesterol can be a precursor to vitamin D, for example. So most of the dietary cholesterol we take in is turned into something else. So it has a very little negligible effect on our heart health and our cholesterol. I would say there's no need to avoid eggs for the general population. People always want a guideline. I would say, probably 8 yolks a week. Over and above that, then there might be a problem. And if you do have a really strong heart history, then we might want to limit those yolks to 4. Still quite a bit more than I think the average person is doing. So things to focus on is just using lean cuts of meat. So maybe trimming off some of the white marbling that you might find on a pork chop or steak. When it comes to poultry, the fat is found just under the skin. So taking it off before we eat it will reduce some of the fat, and you'll reduce even more if you take off the skin before cooking. Other things we can do is using canola oil or olive oil in our cooking. And canola oil, of course, has a slightly higher flash point, so it does better when you're heating it up. Olive oil is great for making dressings or anything like that where you're not heating it. And then just avoiding processed meats. So especially where you see a lot of white marbling within the meat, like things like pepperoni and salami. If we can keep those limited, that's helpful. And probably one of my favorite tips is just playing around a little bit with a meatless meal once a week. So perhaps a meatless Monday where you try a little bit more of the meat alternatives. So maybe the lentils or dried beans, or if you get really wild, you might even try some tofu. Other things we can do just to get those good fats in, and I always prefer people to focus on what they should do rather than what they shouldn't. So we can just add some simple, like say to our cereal, if we have hot cereal, cold cereal in the morning, we can add a bit of chia or flax or hemp seed to either our yogurt or our cereal, or maybe we add it in baking. We can try a little lower fat dairy products. And on the label for saturated fat, you're trying to find those with less than 2 grams of saturated fat. So we're looking for 0 for the trans fats and less than 2 for the saturated fats. What about alcohol? If you don't drink, don't start. There's no evidence that that would be helpful to you at all. But if you do drink, use in moderation. And I think our alcohol guidelines are actually quite liberal. So for women, it's no more than 10 drinks in a week, but it's no more than 2 drinks per day. So you can't just save up all your drinks and have them all at once. It is very hard on our body to have more than 2 at any given time. So for men, it's actually 15 in a week, but no more than 3 drinks per day. So if you have any other questions about alcohol, you can talk to the nurse in your medical home and they'll be able to answer, or your doctor in your medical home in your doctor's office. Fiber. Fiber is something we can add into our diet that can help, because so often we're talking about what you need to take out or what you think what you need to take out, and fiber is something we can add in. And I really don't like to understate its importance. I think it's huge. It is our friend. It does kind of go through the body. It acts like a sponge, kind of cleaning us out as it goes. Definitely lots of evidence that it can lower our risk of heart disease. But not just that, it has some impacts on certain types of cancer and can improve our cholesterol levels. Fiber with our meals can also help our blood sugar. So there's lots and lots of reasons to incorporate it into the diet. How much fiber do I need? You don't have to spend a lot of time memorizing this table. I like to say 25 to 35 grams. If we're in there, we're doing fantastic. The average Canadian gets about 14 grams of fiber, so we are far from the guideline that we have set. Yeah, so where do we get fiber? From vegetables and fruit, and again, I'd like to underline that and highlight it because there's so many things we get from our vegetables and fruit, from our whole grains, then things like dried beans, peas, and lentils, our nuts and seeds, or any of the above combination. And that's just some pictures of the same thing. So my best simple tips to add fiber is to really focus on the vegetables and fruit and thinking about filling half of your plate with vegetables. And if you're nowhere near that, then again, not just noticeable difference. Anytime I have a meal or snack, I think about having a fruit or vegetable there. That can be something to work on. You know, if you just have cereal and milk in the morning, can we slice a bit of banana on that? Can we throw in a bit of berries? Yeah, and trying to eat the vegetable and fruit more often and not just taking juice is a good recommendation as well. Of course, the juice doesn't have the fiber, whereas eating the vegetable or eating the fruit would. And then probably the most underrated or undervalued food in the Canadian diet are things like dried beans and peas and lentils. A lot of us are only having these in, say, our chilies, but they're a great meat replacement. You can even use them in combination with meat and they'll make your dish a lot healthier and also a lot less expensive because dried beans and lentils are relatively inexpensive compared to ground beef and beef right now. So the little tip I like to give people, because sometimes we're a little bit afraid of foods that are new to us, but is to boil up some lentils, or if you have a pressure cooker, that's even faster, but you could just boil them up on a Sunday night, and they take about 20 minutes. You can buy them canned as well. That would be even easier, but if you want to buy the ones that are in the dried ones in the package, you can just follow the directions on the package, which is boiling them for about 20 minutes. For this, I like to use the red, the softer lentils. When they're all boiled up and cooled off, I just plop them in some muffin tins and I let them put them in the freezer until they freeze, and then I pop them out into some Ziploc bags. And then anytime I make something that's a sauce, like a pizza sauce or spaghetti sauce, or if I make a lasagna, I throw 1 or 2 of those little frozen muffins of lentils in, and nobody really notices them. But like I say, it does stretch your meat budget, and it makes the meal more nutritious for sure. And it can be just a nice way to introduce yourself slowly to these foods without feeling like you have to eat something that's totally strange and foreign to you. Oh yeah, but very definitely when you're adding fiber, do so slowly. Don't all of a sudden tomorrow do a whole bunch of chia seed or a psyllium husk, because you will be mad at me. Fiber does tend to, especially when we're just starting out with it or it's new to us, does cause a little bit more gas. And it also can increase stool bulk. So if you don't have enough fluids on board, it can cause constipation. It's also used as a treatment for constipation, but we do have to be getting enough fluids. So just go slow, add a little bit at a time. Make sure that you're getting enough fluids. Slow change is much better than trying to do something overnight and quickly. So I'm not a big fan of the word detox. I just think it's really misunderstood. But fiber is a nice natural detox. Fiber in water is probably one of the best detoxes we can do for our body. That and sweat, I would say. So the way we can get this natural quote unquote detox, which is fiber, looking for some whole grains to increase our fiber intake. So look on your ingredient list for the words whole grain, whether it's whole grain oats or whole grain could be millet. And that speaks to my next point, is just trying different. We are very reliant on wheat in our Canadian foods, but there's so many traditional grains that we just don't incorporate very much anymore. Things like barley, oats we're a little better with, but even that intake is down. But things like millet, I hardly ever see anybody eating. Quinoa, some people are trying it, switching from brown rice to white rice. And a lot of times I get a lot of feedback about this, that people don't like brown rice. And I would just say, for one, how often do you have rice? If you have it very often, then it might be a little bit more worth to explore this. How important is it to you? If it's like that's your favorite thing and you don't want to give it up, then you absolutely don't have to. But I know that a lot of people have been able to make the switch by cooking up a batch of their white rice and cooking up a batch of brown, and rice does freeze really well. So what I do is just pull a little bit out of both, and we would have sort of 50-50, and nobody seems to notice or mind. Eventually you can kind of switch over to the brown if you like, but it's up to you. It is really important, and I don't want to forget to say, it is important that you enjoy the foods you eat and are not just eating something because it's good for you. You want to have some enjoyment and some pleasure out of it. Absolutely. I just wanted to give you a practical example of how you can make some small changes and it can make a really big difference. So this day is, it's pretty typical of what a lot of people would tell me they might eat. There's nothing here that's really unhealthy or nothing that would be any big red flags. So they had Rice Krispies with some milk and a piece of white toast with some butter. At lunch, it was a tuna sandwich with some tomato soup. Supper was grilled chicken breast, white rice with a bit of a salad, just romaine lettuce. So if we do some swaps, so swapping out some corn bran cereal, so that's going to be whole grain. Instead of having the toast, this person put a pear in, changed the white bread to whole grain, and then added a tomato slice to their sandwich instead of the tomato soup, and a half cup of raspberries. And you'll see there that raspberries and the pear pack about almost 10 grams of fiber between the two of them. So that is huge. At supper times, there was a swap from the white rice to brown, and then to add a bit of extra veggies there with a bit more fiber, so things like green peas and broccoli instead of the salad that didn't have much fiber in it. The romaine lettuce doesn't have a ton of fiber. So on that day, they went from just over 10 to almost 30 grams of fiber. So a huge, big jump. So again, you don't need to do all these changes. You could pick one of these kind of changes and just say, oh, I'm going to have raspberries with my breakfast. And that would be huge because you're going to get an extra 4 grams of fiber. So yeah, just small changes can make a big difference. When it comes to drinks, I always like to say you're sweet enough, choose water or milk. And that's just because it's very easy to drink a high amount of calories. Some of those specialty coffees and drinks can be 500 to 1,000 calories, and it's very easy to drink those and not really feel full or satisfied. So, if you have a drink that you just love, a specialty drink, and you have it once or twice a year, then I say just have it and enjoy it. But if you have it's an every other day or an every week habit, then you might want to check into what it is you're taking in. Sometimes they can make some little compromises that will really help to make it just something you could do a little more often. So yeah, if it's an everyday habit or even, quite frequent habit, read the label, ask questions, see if there's substitutions you could make that you wouldn't really notice the difference in the taste, but it would make a big difference in the nutritional value. And these are just some tips that people have given over time that help them drink a little bit more water. So things like using fresh lemon or lime or other fresh fruit. I know people have suggested like freezing strawberries or grapes, or that they have one of those little infusers that go in the middle of their water bottle. If we can remember to take a water bottle with us, that's always helpful because if we don't have it with us, we definitely can't drink it. And people vary in the way that they like their water temperature, but if you like it cold, then keep it in the fridge. And if you prefer it not cold, then maybe you keep a pitcher out at room temperature. Some people like to add a splash of juice. Anything that just gives it a little bit of flavor, some variation. I'm always for things that will help us just get a little bit more water in. Yeah, and if you just wondered what those blood pressure readings mean, remember 120 over 80 is sort of the textbook definition of normal, and there's lots of variation in there on what we consider normal. So if yours isn't exactly 120 over 80, that's not a concern in itself. You can talk to the folks in your medical home, your nurse or your doctor. They'd be able to tell you what your blood pressure is and if there's any concern. So, but just so you know, that top number, we call it systolic. That is the number, that's when the heart is pumping. So when the tap's turned up. And the diastolic is when the heart's relaxing. So that's when the tap or the heart would be turned down and relaxing, and the heart's refilling with blood there. So that's what those numbers mean. Symptoms of high blood pressure, I always like to be very cautious with this slide. Some people may experience, these symptoms that are listed here, like headaches or difficulty hearing or sweating, or shortness of breath or chest pain or all the others that you see there. But most people by and large have no symptoms. So that's why they call it the silent killer. So yeah, just very often people will come in with very high blood pressures and have no, they would not know, they have no symptoms of it. So it's good. That's why we check it often, because yeah, it can be a not so good situation. So salt is probably the one dietary thing to add on. Actually, it's good for heart disease, but specifically we focus on it when the blood pressure is high. So salt causes us to keep a little extra fluid in the body, and that can, of course, if there's more water coming through, more volume, then that can increase blood pressure, and also just more water on board can cause swelling. So how much sodium? Between 1,500 milligrams and 2,300 milligrams typically is what we shoot for from food, cooking, and at the table. So all together from what we take in. And it is a pretty conservative number. Like it might be a bit difficult if you're the kind of person who eats any processed food like soups, things in a can, things in a box. This can add up really quite quickly, and having salt shaker at the table. Yeah, so just notice that by and large, the average Canadian, most of our salt, 75 to 77%, comes from eating out and packaged food. And then there's a sort of 11 to 13% that we add at the table or in our cooking, and that the 12% that's naturally occurring. So you kind of have to look at your own lifestyle here. You know, some people do eat out quite a bit and have more packaged foods, and that might be a place to focus on. If you have less of that kind of thing, you might be more in line with recommendations already. Yeah, so just for a quick guess how much salt is in these popular restaurant items. So this is a crispy chicken salad that you might get when you're eating out, and this is a hamburger and French fries. So the big reveal. So that crispy chicken salad was 1,900 milligrams of salt. The hamburger and fries at a typical fast food restaurant is 3,000 milligrams, so far exceeding our day's recommendation for salt in the hamburger and fries and coming really close to it with a crispy chicken salad. And the deceiving part is I think people would feel like the crispy chicken salad is a good, healthy option for them. We just have to be careful about, there looks like there is a bit of bacon bits in here. I'm not sure if there's dressing, but there is cheese. And then of course, the breading on the chicken looks like it would probably have some seasoning and salt in there. Yeah, so common restaurant foods. So breakfast egg sandwich, I'm just going to go through this rather quickly, has 840 milligrams of sodium. Chicken Caesar salad, so this is just slightly different than the one we saw at the last slide. So that one's 570 milligrams. A 12-inch pepperoni pizza has almost 6,000 milligrams of sodium. So even half of a pizza, if you would eat a half a pizza at one sitting, so that might be 4 slices. Yeah, it's 3,000 milligrams. So that, again, really easily exceeding those recommendations we talked about. And a deluxe cheeseburger with a medium fries, 1,900. A fried chicken dinner, 2,280. So again, kind of exceeding our day's recommendations with one meal. And again, just to put a little caveat here, if it's something you did once a year, I wouldn't sweat it too much. But if you're doing it more often, perhaps having a little less of the things that are higher in salt. And you know, here's a great place to do filling half our plate with our veggies, and then you know what's on the other half is balanced out. So yeah, I think I mentioned some really easier tips to eat less sodium, taking the shaker off the table, and there are things that you can use like no salt or salt substitutes, or just using more seasonings can be a really great way to get less salt. Yeah, but there are some no salt substitutes. Most people find they're pretty comparable tasting, just takes a little bit to get used to. The more often we eat at home, the more likely our meals are to be more nutritious. So using fresh or dried herbs or spices, or I mentioned the no salt there, um, choosing lower sodium foods, and we'll talk just how to see that on the label in just a second. And so just keep in mind that where you want to look is the nutrition facts table in the percentage daily value for sodium. And again, I'll show you that in 1 minute here. So this slide, I just like to give people some options for things to try, because definitely if you're used to salting your food, you know, some people salt it before they even taste it, you might find that, you know, your food is lacking something for a period of time. I find actually though, when people start reducing their salt, it doesn't take them long to get used to it. So for example, in hospital, when we would put people on low salt diets, for the first, you know, week or so, they would complain, but they would start to get used to it. So I think our taste buds they really dulled by things like lots of salt and lots of sugar. And so if we have high amounts of those, they're just less sensitive to them. So as you reduce them, then the taste buds sort of dial things up a little bit, and will taste more of the seasonings and things that you're putting in the food. So yeah, so this is just a slide with some ideas. I won't go through them all for you. It's kind of been up here for a little while, and the slides are of course on the web, so you can just print off a copy of this one if you like. Oh, so, and this is just an example of how we can just make some simple changes and make a big difference. So this is like, say, a Campbell's canned soup, tomato soup with a sandwich that looks to be processed meat, and I would say by the amount of sodium, that's true, some kind of processed deli meat, and it's 2,600 milligrams of sodium, so quite high. If we change that soup to a homemade soup, homemade tomato soup, and left the sandwich just exactly how it is, we've reduced that meal by 1,400 milligrams, so hugely there. And then if we were to do a third little step for changing our processed meat to, you know, a tuna salad sandwich, something like that, it's from processed meat to tuna or egg salad, down to 400 milligrams. So even making one small change can make a big difference when it comes to the salt in food. The DASH diet's a Mediterranean diet. Okay, so the DASH diet and Mediterranean diet. If you haven't heard of the DASH diet before, DASH is just an acronym, and it stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. They both have really good evidence to show that they do help lower blood pressure and protects the heart. So a lot of the recommendations we've already gone over. It's just that these specifically have been focused on or emphasized for blood pressure. So emphasis is on fruits and vegetables, like we talked about, whole grain, you know, bread, cereals, pastas, just more whole grains in general. Low fat dairy, they do incorporate more of those beans, peas, and lentils, and nuts and seeds. The DASH diet actually has a number to focus on, that to have the sodium under. The Mediterranean diet doesn't have a number per se, but it is because it's not processed, it tends to lower people's sodium without them even having to think about it. So that's kind of nice too. Okay, so now we're going to turn to look at the nutrition facts table because this can be really helpful in helping us make decisions. And I find the nutrition facts table is most useful when you're comparing two products because it's really hard to pick up, say, something like a box of crackers and just look at the nutrition facts table and decide if it's a good choice for you or maybe not. But if you have two boxes of crackers that you like the taste of and you're just trying to pick the better one, that's often where I find it has a lot of value. The first thing that I will look at on the nutrition facts table is right here, if you can see my pointer, so the serving size. So that's right under the words nutrition facts, and it'll say the serving size there. So for this item, it's 3/4 of a cup or 100 grams. And sadly, in Canada, you can pick up items and they won't have the same serving size. So if you pick up 2 yogurts, one might be for a 1/2 cup and one might be for a 3/4 cup. And then you're just going to have to do some math and some estimating. So I'm sorry about that. Hopefully in the future we will have some standard serving sizes that will make things a lot easier for people to make good decisions. So the next thing to talk about is just what you see on the label here: calories, fat with the saturated and trans fat breakdown, cholesterol, sodium, carbohydrate with the breakdown below it, and protein. These will always be on your label. There may be some other things on your label, but those will always be there. So there, we did talk about where you see saturated fat on the label and where you see trans fat. That's where you would find it. And we talked about saturated fat being less than 2 grams, and trans fats, we're trying to look for 0. So this is a product, I'm not sure what it would be actually. It's not coming to me what it might be, but I would, in most situations, probably avoid this one. But what we do want to talk about, because sometimes just looking at the grams, most folks have no idea when they see 34 grams of carbohydrate what that means. What does it translate to? So that's why they came up with this percentage daily value column. And the percentage daily value is based on the average male and about a 2,000 calorie diet. So just keep that in mind, that it's not going to be an exact measurement for you, because we may not all eat 2,000 calories. Some of us may eat more than 2,000 calories. So it may not be, but it gives us an indication. So what you want to think of here is 5% or less is a little, 15% or more is a lot. So in this product, when you see 48% saturated fat, that's a huge red flag here. Yeah, so there may be some things where you want more in a product. So things like iron and calcium and fiber. So 15% or more would be a lot of those things. And there would be times where you want 5% of less or less. So things like your fat and your saturated fat and trans fat and sodium. So we're looking for 5% in those columns. Yeah, sorry, so I skipped ahead a little bit in what I was saying, but there you see there's the serving size and the percentage daily value is over in this column here. Yeah, so I really did skip ahead there. So just to reiterate, we're moving on to the fats here. Choose those foods with less than 2 grams of saturated fat and 0 grams of trans fat. And fiber, if we can find foods that have more than 2 grams of fiber, that's a wonderful thing. And there's your reminder about the percentage daily value there. And probably one of the most important things there is the sodium. So this product would have 320 milligrams of sodium. What does that translate to? Well, that's 13%. So it's not super high. It's not over that 15%. It just depends what the product is, and is there another product that might be a better choice for you. And note that that answer is going to change from person to person. Some people are going to be looking for less sugar. Some people will be looking for less fat. Oftentimes, the marketplace is very clever. So for example, with dressings, I see this quite often, and peanut butter and ice cream to the regular dressing, and then then right beside it will be the light dressing. And when you flip over and look at the nutrition facts, you'll find that the calories are just about the same, within about 20 calories. And what you'll notice is they reduce the fat, but they added more sugar. So for some people, that might not be a better choice. So it is important to kind of take a look and not just be swayed by what you see on the packaging. And just one quick slide here on smoking. It's quitting smoking, reducing smoking is probably the best thing you can do for your heart health and for your health in general. There's an amazing resource we have online. You can get lots of supports online. It's Alberta Quits, so it's www.abquits.ca, or there's a phone number here that you can take down and phone. The Alberta Quits, when you sign up, they will send you fairly regular emails that will help you stay quit if you've chosen to do so. Lots of resources on, supports that can help you get through the rough patches. With smoking, it's the one time where it's good to be a quitter. And I'll just leave that here for today. But yeah, if you need more resources, albertaquits.ca or that phone number there. You can also talk to the folks in your medical home, so your doctor or nurse or even the social worker can get you started, or HealthLink. There's some supports there too. And activity, of course, we can't talk about heart health without talking about the importance of activity. So important. And we did talk when we were talking about that healthy cholesterol, how activity has a positive effect on it, and that's what we want. So there's also so many other good reasons to be active. It reduces our stress. It's probably one of the best strategies we can use to reduce our stress is regular activity. And when I say activity, no, that doesn't mean that you have to go to the gym for an hour. It means taking a 10-minute stroll after dinner, especially if you haven't been active before. That's a fantastic place to start. And even if it's only Monday and Friday, you take a stroll after dinner. Any activity is better than none at all. So, and even if you decide, well, I'm going to park a block away and walk into work, that is so much better than not doing anything. So those little bits do add up, and they are important. So never think that it's not enough or it's not good enough. Little small changes that we do consistently make the most difference. Yeah, so with physical activity, find something you enjoy and just stick with it. If you're walking on that treadmill saying to yourself, I'm doing this, but I hate it, I just don't think we're very likely to stick with it. But if we find something that we like, or even if we find something to do with a friend that we really enjoy, walking for an hour on its own might not be very interesting. But if you meet up with a friend and have a chit chat while you do it, the time flies by. And a friend can help you stay engaged and can just keep you kind of on track. You can keep each other on track. But like I mentioned, fitting activities into our day, so maybe just taking the stairs a few more times, fitting in a 10-15 minute walk at lunchtime. Don't think you have to, tomorrow I need to do half an hour walk. Maybe we break it into smaller chunks. Maybe we take a quick walk first thing in the morning, just go around the block, and then maybe a little one at lunch and a little one after, and all those add up. All those little 5 minutes add up. But it's really important to just think about one small thing that when you think about it, you think, I can do that. That's no big deal. If we do that and we stay consistent with it, eventually that just becomes part of our habit. We sort of rewire our brain, not sort of, we do rewire our brain, and then that thing becomes the easy thing to do. And when we get there, then maybe we look at the next small thing. So don't change much, change one little thing that you can stick with and be consistent with and be proud of yourself for it. And then when that becomes just like your regular habit, then we start with another thing. Yeah, and I think, sorry, I think I talked about all these examples, like taking the stairs or a walk after eating, lifting soup cans in your kitchen. If you have a show that you like and for some reason you're still watching the commercials, you could do a bit of a walkabout or a break in the middle, or just doing a little squat before you sit down, or a little wall push up when you come into a room. I believe every little bit counts, and that should say every, not ever. Yeah, and the last part, we're just talking about SMART goals, which we've done in our other presentations. So, but I can't underestimate the importance of writing things down, especially if you feel stuck. So if you feel like you keep trying to gather information and you're spinning your wheels and nothing's coming together, I'd like you to think of this quote, and I'd like you to think of SMART goals. So the quote is, "A dream written down with a date becomes a goal. A goal broken down into steps is a plan. And a plan, when we back it by just setting the wheels in motion, just some action, you can do anything you want." SMART is just an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable. The slide says rewarding, but I also say realistic. And the slide says time frame, but I say timely, like it has a time frame attached. So for example, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because definitely you can connect with somebody in your medical home, or print off the handout on SMART goals and walk through it yourself or with someone else in your home. It's pretty intuitive. It's called Setting Goals for Lifestyle Change, and it is in the handouts. And it's a great way to start if you're kind of stuck with SMART goals. So I want to be really specific, though. A lot of times when people will make a goal, they'll say something like, "I want to eat more fruits and vegetables," or "I want to be more active." It's a wonderful goal. So happy you're investing in your health, but that's a very pie in the sky goal. It's very big, and we are so unlikely to follow through with a goal like that. So the idea behind SMART goals is that it's specific. So, for example, on this slide, I will eat at least one more serving of fruits and vegetables a day. Or I will eat breakfast, including 3 food groups, 3 days this week. And you want to have a time when you'll start it. So I love when people say tomorrow instead of Monday, because why wait till Monday? And yeah, and then think about anything that you might need to make your goal come true. If you need to shop for certain things, or whatever you might need. Also, give a think to what might get in your way. So if it's breakfast, what if I sleep in? Could I maybe throw a granola bar in my car and a fruit cup so that I could have my granola bar on my way to work in my car and have my fruit cup quickly as I pull in? That's the kind of idea. Is you want to think about what's going to support you in your goal, what might get in your way. We want to make sure you have the best chance of success. So I hope you were able to identify one and at the most 2, but I'd like to encourage you just to pick one really small change that you could make your SMART goal for. And I know that feels like something small and like, oh, it doesn't feel like I'm doing much. But I just want to draw your attention to the analogy of water. So water is really soft and yielding, and it just goes around things. But over time has the power to change landscapes. And that's kind of what we want to impart to you. Just a small change, but something you can live with and stick with. And then when that feels just like life and just what you do, then we move on to the next thing. And just that reminder there at the bottom, think about a just noticeable difference. So you don't have to change much. If you know you always over portion potatoes, 2 bites less. If you're not active at all right now, a 5 or 10 minute walk after dinner. Just a small change that you're, even if you feel like doesn't feel like I'm doing a whole lot, then that's probably a good change for you. So just to recap what we talked about, um, we want to make sure that we're fueling and hydrating our body to just set ourselves up for the best chance of success. My little rules of thumbs are trying to eat within 2 hours of waking, and not going more than 4 hours at any given time without eating. 4 and at the most 6. So on occasion we can go 4 hours, but we really shouldn't go more than 6 without eating. I really encourage people to try to eat at least 3 meals a day. If you're already doing 3 meals a day, like there's many different ways to eat healthy, and we just need to find one that works for you. So there's no prescription here. These are just suggestions and offerings, and you can choose whether you want to take them in. I would suggest just having a gentle curiosity about things and an open mind. And if you've never eaten breakfast before, have a gentle curiosity about that, a little experiment. What if on Mondays and Wednesdays, if I do eat a breakfast, do I feel better or worse in my day? More energy, less energy? Maybe I notice I don't have such heavy cravings in the afternoon, something like that. So just, have a gentle curiosity with yourself, and that takes a lot of the judgment out of it. And I really think that is a good direction to go in, because we judge ourselves way too harshly. And it doesn't help us. It doesn't help us be motivated to do good things for ourselves. I mentioned drinking water and milk. You're sweet enough, choose water and milk at most of the time if you can. And just focusing, a great place to focus, in all honesty, is just eating more of that fruits and vegetables. So this is something you can do, and not focusing on something we shouldn't be doing, but focusing on making half that plate, or working up to getting half the plate being, mostly vegetables. Maybe there's some fruit in there. That's our focus, or our priority. And then, like I said, what's on the other side of the plate doesn't, we're balancing it out, doesn't have as much importance. And really looking for higher fiber choices. Unfortunately, in Canada, as we discussed, we just don't get enough fiber. So any little compromises where we can get a little more, there's so many good things that fiber does for us. And again, it's a place where we can look to make a positive change, and we're not thinking about what we shouldn't do. Sometimes those less healthy habits just slide off. One of my favorite sayings is strive for progress, not perfection. And I always say that I'm a work in progress. So definitely find activity or movement, or whatever you want to call it, that you enjoy doing for its own sake. The human body was meant to move, and even if you do have some sort of limitation which limits your activity, there's lots of options and modifications that can be made. So you can do activity while sitting, or in whatever position that we just need something that works for you to stay moving. And small steps work better than giant leaps, and just pick one or two small things that you can work on. I feel like I've said that a number of times, so I'm sorry for the repetition, but so important, because I do find human nature is to be an all or nothing thinker, and we like to dive into things, and when we dive in, we like to hit the gym, and we like to go 5 days a week, and we like to make sure we're there for an hour. It's not worth going, and before we know it, we can't keep that up. That's just silly, and it's kind of upset our whole life in the meantime. So we'd be much better, people love a 30-day challenge, but we would be much better just to say to ourselves, Monday and Wednesday after dinner, I'm going to, take the dog out, or I'm going to take myself out for a walk, and it only has to be 10 minutes, because it's really so much easier to get your brain on side. Because if you have to go to the gym, and you have to get changed, and you have to go for an hour, the brain will pull up all kinds of resistance, and the brain does like the path of least resistance. It likes to sit on the couch if that's what you've been doing, and it doesn't like to get out of its ruts. So it's with these small changes that we work on and we're consistent with, we can actually create new neural pathways in our brain. We know that for sure. And that's really kind of cool thing about the human brain. And that brings us to the end. So I thank you so much, and especially if you've stuck right through the end. I know this is less than ideal way to learn, and I very much miss having a crowd of people, a class of people to be more interactive with and to have your questions. And hopefully soon we'll get up and running virtually and be able to do that. I can't wait. I'm missing it. But if you did manage to stick through right to the end, so good for you. Thank you so much. And take really good care. And again, it's Kathy speaking here, the dietitian from Highland Primary Care. Okay, take care.